A major voting rights victory in New York. New York City's Board of Elections has entered into a consent decree with the federal government to restore the voting rights of those who were illegally purged from registration rolls. More than 100,000 people were kicked off New York City voter rolls before the April 2016 presidential primary election. Most of the residents who were purged lived in Brooklyn. After showing up at the polls, they were either not allowed to vote because their names had been removed or were required to fill out affidavit ballots. Key provisions of the consent decree included staying in effect through the November 2020 election. The New York Elections Board must also establish detailed procedures to ensure that eligible voters are not wrongly designated for removal from voter rolls. Let's go right to Kristen Clarke, of course, with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law. Of course, they're the ones who went after New York and were able to get this. Kristen, when you look at this, when you look at Ohio, where they basically are kicking you off if you don't vote in every election, this is not a question of Democrats, Republicans. It's not a question of liberal or conservative. What we're seeing here are individuals who are targeting people, and they are trying to affect democracy by the ballot box.
That's right. And there is an assault on voting rights all across our country, and purge programs, removing legitimately registered voters from the rolls, is an old and familiar tactic, one that we've seen throughout the South, but you wouldn't expect to find officials in a place like New York City striking people from the rolls in the way that they did here. Last spring, during the primary election in 2016, there was pure chaos in New York City. There were thousands of voters who showed up to the rolls in Brooklyn and other parts of New York City, only to find that their names were removed from the rolls. They were not offered affidavit ballots, which are a safeguard that would have preserved the opportunity for those folks to vote and give officials a chance to cure the error. We identified impacted individuals in the fall. They contacted us by way of our 866 Our Vote hotline. We quickly went into court to file suit, and we got immediate relief in November that required that those people who were removed be offered an affidavit ballot. But we're really proud of the permanent and full victory that we got last week that requires that the New York City Board of Elections overhaul its process. They can no longer remove people from the rolls in violation of the law. They have to restore people who were illegally and unlawfully removed, and they're subject to monitoring for a period of time.
And Kristen, these things are literally happening. These things are literally happening right before elections.
That's right. And what was so troubling is in New York City, they weren't offering people an affidavit, which is a safeguard. The New York State Attorney General's office intervened in the case. The Justice Department, during better days, also filed a statement of interest on our side. So, we were working with our partners at Latino Justice. We had the state, we had the federal government, all saying that what New York City was doing was wrong. It shows that purge programs, efforts to lock people out of the ballot box are not problems confined to the South. These are problems that we see all across the country. New York City is not immune, and we have to be vigilant and stay on top of officials who continue to erect barriers that make it harder for ordinary Americans to vote, African Americans and Latinos in particular.
Kristen, also, what are the other provisions of this consent decree in terms of to ensure they abide by it?
They have to, again, restore impacted people to the rolls. So this provides relief to thousands who were unlawfully removed in violation of the NVRA. Going forward, they have to offer affidavit ballots to somebody who shows up if their name is not on the rolls. And they're subject to court monitoring and auditing to make sure that they never again are purging people in violation of the law. When people take the time and effort to register and add their name to the rolls, it's important that we safeguard their ability to exercise that right on Election Day. Federal law prohibits officials from removing people. If they believe they may have moved, you still have to wait 2 federal election cycles before you can take them off. In New York City, they were striking people left and right. It violates the law. The right to vote is the most important right in our democracy, and the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law will continue to stand up to make sure that all voters can have their voices heard in our democracy.
Shelley, go to my iPad, please. This is a story from the New York Times, and it says he didn't vote in a few elections. In the next one, Ohio said he couldn't. Kristen, the Supreme Court is going to be hearing this particular case where this man here, Larry Harmon, who didn't vote in several elections in 2012, he said he was unimpressed with the candidates. But 3 years later, he wanted to vote against the ballot initiative to legalize marijuana. Well, his name wasn't on the list. It turns out that in Ohio, they removed his name because they said he hadn't voted. The Supreme Court will be hearing this particular case as it relates to states purging people. In a sense, what they're saying is in Ohio, and other states want to do this, driven by Republicans. If you don't vote in every election, you get thrown off. This is a critical case because, again, if they are successful, we have seen this with voter ID, we've seen it with other voter suppression tactics, these Republican-led states will run quickly to implement such laws.
This is one of the most important cases the Supreme Court will hear this term. They basically were implementing a use or lose it approach to the right to vote in Ohio. We believe that this also was an unlawful purge program. The Justice Department agreed with that position during the Obama era. It's another moment where under Jeff Sessions, the Justice Department has done an about-face. They now defend Ohio's unlawful practices. We're confident that when the Supreme Court hears this case, they'll agree with us that this violates the National Voter Registration Act. Again, when people take the time and effort to register to vote, it's important that we preserve that right. Ohio had no right to remove people from the rolls merely for choosing not to vote in an election.
In fact, Kristen, 1 second. In fact, Shelley, go back to my iPad. According to this study, Reuters did a study. They found that at least 144,000 people were removed from the voting rolls in recent years in Ohio's 3 largest counties: Cleveland, Cincinnati, Columbus. Where do black folks reside?
In those very places. These are practices that sadly are always targeted at African Americans, Latinos, and other minority communities. There is a clear assault on the voting rights of Americans, but that assault is one that falls more heavily on our communities. It's why we continue to stand up. It's why we continue to file lawsuits. It's why we continue to encourage people to contact us at 866-OUR-VOTE and report the unlawful efforts that we see all across the country to strip away our most sacred right to vote.
And Kristen, and also, this is also why the folks in Ohio, and I keep calling on the Divine Nine, fraternities and sororities, men's groups, women's groups, these black churches, they should be getting behind State Rep Alicia Reese's ballot initiative to put it on the ballot to have a voter Bill of Rights enshrined in the Constitution of Ohio that would eliminate this. The problem we're seeing in Ohio, and we're seeing in other places as well, is that they keep having to go to court. You have to keep going to court, ACLU, NAACP, when it comes to this deal. But if it is enshrined in the Constitution, it is protected. They need about 300,000 plus votes. They've got more than 100,000. And so folks really need to be signing those petitions with State Representative Alicia Reese. Kristen Clarke, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
I want to go to my panel. A. Scott Bolden, legal analyst and chairman of the National Bar Association PAC. Julian Malveaux, economist and president emerita of Bennett College, host of It's Personal with Dr. J podcast. Pastor Shannon Wright, third vice chairman, Maryland Republican Party. Shannon, I'll start with you. The Supreme Court case here. 12 states, those that lean Democrat, have filed a brief in this particular Supreme Court case supporting the guy who said, I got screwed by having my name purged. 17 states, Republican-leaning states, are siding with Ohio. This is a perfect example of what I keep arguing, that it is a part of the Republican Party's strategy for voter suppression. This, for me, falls under the umbrella of voter suppression. How, and the way it works in Ohio is that if you don't vote in the election, they send you a notice, and then if you don't vote in the next election, they automatically kick you off because they assume you moved. This guy said, I never moved. I never saw the notice, and why should I have to vote in every election, and why I get kicked off?
Well, I am a Republican. However, I did not read anywhere that the right to vote has an expiration date. So, although I may be Republican, it doesn't mean I agree with all of the things that are going on. This is something that is not correct. If our system is supposedly based on the individual's right to vote and express their thoughts and their desires and their representation, then there needs to be a vote. That's not relegated to one particular party. In my opinion, I see it more as a color thing, where our vote is just discounted, regardless of party. We are discounted not just in voting, but in terms of economics and across the board. There are a lot of issues here at play, and as far as I've ever read, the right to vote doesn't expire.
Julian, for all the people out there who are running around saying, oh, Hillary Clinton is the same as Donald Trump. There's no difference between the two. Let me give you a perfect example. The Obama Department of Justice sided with this guy and others in the leading up to the Supreme Court by saying that this was voter disenfranchisement. Trump wins, his Department of Justice flips sides, and they're siding with Ohio. They are endorsing voter suppression and purging folks from the voter rolls.
You know, Roland, I wish they would just change the name to the Department of Injustice, because that's what it is. Systematically Beauregard, I call Sessions Beauregard because that's his middle name. After
You used to call him Little Wizard, too.
No, I didn't call him that.
Oh,
that was you, Scott.
Oh, okay.
That was you. But in any case, time after time after time, they've stood for the right for injustice. Private prisons are back in play. Today in the Post, they're talking about a private prison company that gave Trump I don't know, nearly $500,000 weeks before the election. And this is just more of the same. But the fact is that people have, as you said, the right to vote. And that right is not a mutable right, it's immutable. But we know that our history shows that African American people in particular very often had these kind of challenges back in the day, back in the, in the 60s, the grandfather clauses. I remember my great aunt in Mississippi having been told to read a passage in Latin. And so she flunked, of course, but then she went back and studied it, and then when she went back, they gave her another passage. So it wasn't the same one. Just systematically taking people's voting rights away. So it's wrong, we know it's wrong, and you're right. The Divine Nine need to get it going on. They know what to do, and we need to do it.
Shelley, again, back to my iPad. This is Larry Harmon. This is a white guy. This is a white guy. And in the New York Times article, he says, you know what, for the longest, I never had a problem with voter ID. He said, but now I see this is a deliberate attempt to target voters.
Absolutely. It's voter fraud. This is the voter fraud that the Trump voting commission needs to be reviewing. They're reviewing everything else. I got to tell you, if you could bring a civil RICO action against the Republican Party or Republican-leaning states, this would be it, to suppress the black vote, suppress and targeting voters, if you could actually do that.
And hold on. It's not just black vote. Because what they're doing is they're targeting
others.
They're targeting elderly voters. They're targeting young voters. And I keep telling older white folks and young white folks, don't think you're not caught up in this. In 2016, there was a clerk in Wisconsin, of course, state Trump barely wins, who said point blank she was moving an early voting site off of a college campus because too many young folks were voting Democrats, and they moved it to a far out place with a very small parking lot you can barely get to. She admitted that.
Right.
That's how open they are about what they're doing.
And intentional, how intentional they are. The ACLU, the NAACP, and these other organizations, I would urge them to look at these voting rules across the country in each state. And instead of waiting for Election Day when it manifests itself, but to challenge these rules early and often as they go around the country and do this review, because it is so significant and reduces the amount of voting for not just black folks, but white folks and others.
Well, again, and I'm sure as you're watching your other news shows, if you want to watch those shows, they're still focusing on Jeff Flake's speech on the Senate floor, talking about Trump, things along those lines. Well, let me be clear. I guarantee you not a single one of these cable networks are talking about this case and talking about other cases like this, because they're focused on process in D.C. as opposed to how regular folks are getting screwed.
Weekdays on TV One.
I will never lie to you.
Oh my God.
Roland Martin.
He doesn't want to talk to us. He wants to ignore us.
Uncensored.
Hell no.
That ain't gonna cut it, boo.
Unapologetic.
No, that is fundamentally false. You are wrong.
Unfiltered.
He wants an America where we all look alike. He ain't talking about black people.
Unrelenting.
You better go work out, because you got a fight on your hands.
NewsOne Now with Roland Martin. Weekdays at 7 a.m. on TV One.